Hi, and welcome to Hanaz Writers podcast. My name's Charlotte, and I work as a Year 2 teacher in a primary school in London. If you haven't heard any podcasts from Hanaz Writers before, then have a listen on their YouTube and Spotify channels. You can search for them on both websites, and you can start listening to the podcasts that they have available. As the month of April is known as National Poetry Month, in this podcast, I'm going to talk about why poems are written in different forms. Poems are great literary pieces, and they are usually short, and they usually describe things or events in a fun way. They use certain types of language to set them apart from stories and novels and prose. So when we write sentences, we usually use correct grammar and punctuation, and they follow a certain structure, especially in English language. The structure is of a subject, a verb, and then an object. So, for example, listen to the following sentence. John went to the shop. In the sentence, John is the subject, and then went is the verb, to and is the determiner of the sentence, and shop is the object. So stories are written in full sentences just like this, and authors follow this sentence structure throughout their writing. And of course, they can expand their sentences, they can add lots of descriptive language, they add dialogue of people talking, and they add different types of punctuation to make their story and characters come alive. With poetry, they do still have full sentences, and they might include lots of description, but they also follow different sentence structures. They will have a subject, a verb, and an object, but they might include different types of writing techniques. And this can be things such as metaphors, similes, they can have alliteration, onomatopoeia, and so on and so on. And all of these types of features are used a lot in poetry and poems to help bring the poet's words to life. Now, both styles of writing still try to encourage readers to use their imagination to bring things to life so they can see and visualize what has been written. So why are there different poem styles? Well, poems are a lot shorter than stories, and they use verses. And this means that sentences are separated into different amounts, into groups, and depending on what type of poem is written, they follow different structures. So, for example, some poetry might have stanzas or verses which have groups of sentences together. And these groups of sentences will then follow a particular rhyming scheme. So let's say that they follow the rhyming scheme where the last two words from, say, the first line of the verse and the third line of the verse rhyme together. And then the last two words from the second line and the fourth line rhyme together. So that will give you a stanza of 4 lines, but they must end in a particular pattern. And we call that pattern AB, AB. Sometimes the pattern can change, so you can have AA, BB. And that just means that the last two words of line 1 and 2 rhyme, and the last two words of line 3 and 4 rhyme. But they must follow the pattern. If they don't have rhyming words at the end of the verses or the stanzas, then it cannot be considered that type of poem. It cannot be part of that poetry. Then it can change and be a free verse poem. And free verse poems allows you to have rhyming words or non-rhyming words at the end of their sentences. But they still follow the groups of stanzas, so they still have 4-line verses, or they still have a certain amount of verses. I mean, it doesn't have to be 4 lines, it could be 6, it could be 8. It just depends on how you're writing your poem. And this is like having a poem with rhyming words at the end is kind of a typical style of poetry in English. The last words rhyme with each other, but they are always different words unless you have to use the same word with a different sound, different spelling. For example, bank and bank. But you can still use them, but you can have the sentence just needs to correspond to which bank you're using. So you can have the Bank of the River or the Bank of England, for example. And then it's the poet's task, which is kind of tough sometimes, where they have to then sit and think carefully about what they want to say and how they want to say it in their poem. Some poems might rely on how many syllables that a word has, and this allows for an interpretation of language. In Japan, they write haikus, and this supports their type of poetry writing using their words in their particular type of language. Sometimes it's tricky to come up with different types of words and different types of sounds. So, what they do, depending on their language, they use the syllables of words and they use that as the basis of their poetry writing. So, haikus consistently have one line of syllable words, one line of 7-syllable words, and then one line of 5-syllable words. And for Japanese speakers, they can use their language to create their poem in this way. For English is a little bit harder because our language and our words are not the same as Japanese language and Japanese words. So it's a difficult task, but the beauty of the poem is that you're able to create something following this style of writing. So you then have to sit as a poet, you sit and think, how can I create a 3-line poem where the first line consists of 5-syllable words, the second line has 7 syllables, and then the last line has 5. So it's also a task in itself, and also it tests the poet and their natural ability to create poems. This is only just one example of a poem and its structure. And there are lots of other poems that are written in different styles and also have different structures. So, for example, in English writing, I'm just picking English because that's my first language and it's kind of the one that I use when I'm teaching as well. So we have kennings, we have limericks, sonnets, we have epic poems, we have ballads, and so on. And the list goes on and on and on. I think when I was checking, we have more than at least maybe 30 different styles of poems that we can write. So poems are lots of fun to write, but they do test the writers, they test their poets. Some people just have a knack for words and they're just able to understand how words work. They know how their words sound and they know what things can be said, they know how to say it, and then they use this knowledge to their advantage. So they can just write fun and creative poems. Poems allow writers to share their thoughts, they share their feelings, and they share their ideas with other people. And it's just like writing a story. They just write it in a different structure and a different style. Some people who have a really good grasp of poetry like the way that words rhyme, and they like the way that words sound, and they can just reel off the lyrics really quickly. Singers, songwriters, and rappers are just amazing poets, really. And in the past, there used to be people who wrote songs about events that happened, events that occurred, because they weren't able to write a whole novel about it. They weren't able to write a whole story. So instead of recording a massive 5,000-page novel about who did what, they sang it. They created a song. They created a poem about what the person did. And then they sang the song. They added a tune to it, and the ballads then sang themselves. And they sang the poem and song, and wherever they went, they told people about the events that took place, and people just listened to their song, and they understood it. They understood what was happening, who did what, and they learned about different events that took place in this way. So these days in modern society, it's very similar to our singer-songwriters, our rappers, people who want to tell people about things, and they do it in a fun way. Most songs are about love, or about breakups, or about how people fight each other, or how wars start, or conflict, or about joy, about happiness, about a feeling that they enjoy, happiness and joyfulness and these kind of things. And sometimes the best way to do it, the best way to describe those feelings, the best way to describe the events, the best way to tell other people about it is through a song. And that's how singers and songwriters come about, you know? And they use that to their advantage. They create pop songs, they create raps, They create fun poems. At the moment at school, we're learning about London, the Great Fire of London, and the most famous song about it is London's Burning. And this was created by someone who wanted to tell people about what happened. And again, it's got a verse: London's burning, fetch the engines, fire, 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 pour on water, London's burning, London's burning. And they just add to the verse, but they do it in a sing-song way. They've created a poem out of it, and people learn about the fire of London in that way. And it's also got a catchy tune, so then they can remember it, and then they can sing it again and again. And this is how they pass on the information to other people. And people learn the song, and then they learn about this event that happened in 1666. There's also other songs about it as well. So other people wrote different types of songs and different styles of songs, and then it became well known. And again, it's just a way to record information, to share information, and make people remember as well. So at the beginning of this podcast, I was looking at why poems are written in a particular form. Well, they're written in different forms because of language, because of the structure of language, and because of the way that people can use that structure and the grammar and their language to create fun rhymes, fun poems, fun songs and ballads and so on and so on. And it's just a different way of using language to send out information to people, tell people something has happened. And I think that's one of the fun things about poems. They allow you to do that. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you would like to listen more, then please like and subscribe to Hanaz Writers YouTube and Spotify channels. If you're interested in becoming a published author, then visit Hanaz Writers' website, and you can sign up for free and have a look through the website and find out lots and lots of different types of information. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, bye!